Hey, welcome back to Unschooled Theology. I'm one of your hosts, Derick, and with me, as always, is Evan. Good day, sir.
Good day to you, sir.
All right, let's begin. Genesis 3:14, first half of the curse upon the serpent. So let's take a look here. The Lord God said to the serpent, "Because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and above all beasts of the field. On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life." All right, so the first thing to note here is that the only individual cursed in this situation, given a curse directly upon them, is the serpent. So the man, the woman, they are not given a curse directly upon them in this situation. The only one to whom God says, "You are cursed," is the serpent. So that's interesting. The snake here, the most shrewd, is also the most cursed. So there's something about being crafty, maybe that ends up being a curse as much as anything else. So before we really get in here on what this means, I want to talk a little bit more. We've hinted at this a couple times previously, and I think one of our introduction episodes, and maybe when we talked about the serpent the first time, but we talked about the man representing sort of the masculine impulse to sin, and the woman representing a feminine impulse towards sin. And to me, I look at both of those things as like parts we might play, right? In the course of our life, sometimes we end up playing the part of the man and we end up in sin that way. And sometimes we play the part of the woman and we end up in sin that way. I think, though, there is a third role that people may inhabit within this story. And that is the role of the serpent. Because particularly, I think, in Protestantism, and I don't know how much the Catholics go this route or not, but the idea of the serpent, it's often, oh, well, this was Satan, right? And I think, so part of that comes from, not really part, all of that comes from the fact that in Revelation, there's reference to the great serpent being defeated. And so they say, oh, well, that must have been, this must be the great serpent. Mm-hmm. Well, we talked before a few episodes back about the idea of patterns, right? So when I say that, we play the masculine part, what I'm saying is sometimes we are that pattern and that pattern unfolds in us, or the feminine pattern. Sometimes we inhabit the feminine pattern. Well, what the serpent is here is a pattern. That it's a pattern of behavior, right? Especially if we're not looking at this strictly historically, and we've pointed out many times why we aren't doing that. Then what's being described here is a pattern, and the idea of the great serpent would be the one who most thoroughly fulfills that pattern, if you could, say that, is the completest version of that pattern. That's the great serpent. But
potentially the pattern that everyone else attempts to emulate, who's emulating that pattern.
Yeah. They're doing a lesser version of that pattern, right? It's almost like Plato's theory of forms, right? Like all trees are sort of like the pattern of whatever this thing is that is like the ideal pattern of tree, right? That's what it means to be tree, is this ideal pattern that we don't see clearly, but we sort of understand, and that's why we call things trees. Kind of that idea is the great serpent is the completest version of that pattern. But this, I think many of us can point at times in our lives where we've dealt with people playing the role of the serpent, right? People who, for whatever reason, and their reason doesn't matter, but they have sought to have us do what they and we knew was wrong. Right? For whatever reason, they wanted us to do wrong, sometimes with them, oftentimes with them, oftentimes too, it's just pushing you to do something because they find it, I don't know, entertaining to watch people do that, which is wrong.
Well, motivation's never presented here with the serpent.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so that doesn't matter. My point is just there are people who do that.
Only capability is presented.
Right.
Is that he was the shrewdest, so he's capable of causing trouble.
Yes.
Causing mischief. And his reason for causing mischief isn't presented. And it's not like the woman convinces the man to eat. It's only the serpent who does convincing and puts in the effort to cause this mischief to take place.
Right.
So that is a very different role.
Right.
And I think it's suitable to say there are people that do that.
Yes.
That's a very good argument. That's very reasonable to say. And there are people that play the feminine who just simply lead people astray by their actions or draw them in that way. But it's an active interest that goes on here with the serpent.
Yes. These are people who have, like the serpent, deceived or manipulated or cajoled us towards wrongdoing, right? Mm-hmm. They were serpents to us. And we may even recognize a time or two in our own lives where maybe we played that role. Hopefully not too often. But so the curse we see described here, and this will matter particularly in the next episode when we talk about verse 15, but it matters here too. I don't believe this is like a curse that applies to a character called Satan, and this is the beginning of some grand cosmic narrative, right? A moment in time that starts this whole story. Ultimately, I think what this curse is, it is what all adversaries of God suffer or would suffer. But I think if you find yourself playing the role of the serpent, you don't fully embody it like the great serpent. But if you find yourself taking on that pattern, you suffer these things, if that makes sense. So these are, if you try to inhabit and maybe even unknowingly, not aware that's what you're doing, but if you take on the pattern of the serpent, this is what befalls that pattern. So as we examine the curse here, I think it's going to describe a rather applicable approach to this, right? In terms of saying like, hey, these are consequences we all can face. It's not just some character named Satan who faced these things. Like, no, if we take on the role of serpent, this is what happens to us. So
to further illustrate that, or there's just the emulation idea, because I think that's going to be a sticking point for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. We refer to if you refer to yourself as a Christian, that's what you refer to yourself in that light, just not being an emulation of the serpent, but an emulation of Christ.
Yeah, you're trying to inhabit that pattern, right?
Being that perfect encapsulation, that ideal encapsulation of what you are attempting to emulate.
Take on the pattern of Christ, yeah.
And so the contrary of that potentially here would be the great serpent being the emulation of that. But there's no, it's not. Okay, yeah, you're right. There's no clarity. It's never distinctly said that this is the perfect emulation of what a serpent is. It's never said that this is the ideal, it's never said that this is Satan. That's never made clear in the Bible, I mean, we have John Milton to thank more for that being a popularly understood idea than anything else, because it's not exactly, it's not made clear here that is the case. Exactly. All right, so let's look at this then. The first thing that God does here is to the serpent is to push him below the livestock and the beast of the fields, right? Mm-hmm. So this is interesting, but this is related to, we've talked before about the order of beings, right? Beings of higher order, beings of lower order, right? And God being above man, and then man, and man being above animals, and animals being above plants, and so on, right? So to be a serpent is to be of a lower order even than the animals. That's what it's saying. It's saying that if you take on the pattern of the serpent, you push yourself below even the animals. You're worse than they are, right? So why would that be, right? That seems like a weird thing at first. So I think we have to consider for a moment what would compel one to want to play the role of the serpent, right? And it's interesting because in this story, it is a serpent. It's not another human that's doing the tempting, but it's something different. So what that implies then
because a serpent is a beast of the field, basically, is that a serpent is already lower than the other humans, right? That's what the serpent is. It's already lower than the other humans. So the serpent, though, doesn't like things being above it. And so the problem is that the serpent doesn't want to rise up to the level of humans. If you have a sort of an issue with things being above you, the rather than bring yourself up, the idea is to pull things down to your place within the cosmic order of things, right? And that particular idea is something that's been reflected many times over, even in retellings of the serpent, even when the serpent is described as Satan, right? Even in Milton and even ancient Jewish rabbis who don't describe the serpent as Satan, but talk about the serpent's motivations. Really, anywhere you see ideas behind the serpent's motivations, it's always motivated by a sense of jealousy of humanity. Mm-hmm. It's always that is the key issue. And so that sense of jealousy, when you're jealous of someone, there's three things you can do. You can accept things as they are, right? That's probably the ideal way. You can try to raise yourself up. That's a perfectly good way too. Sometimes we're not always capable of that, depending on what it is that we're pursuing. Or you can try and drag them down to your level. And that's what the serpent does here. Mm-hmm. The serpent is trying to drag people down to its level, right? So here, though, what we're seeing God describe is that when you do that, when you try to pull people down to your level, you're always doomed to failure, right? With that strategy, you're always doomed to failure. Playing the role of trying to pull someone down will make you lower than the animals, right? Mm-hmm. At least the animals are content with where they sit in the cosmic order. They don't appear to try to rise up, but they also don't appear to try to bring anyone down. The serpent is trying to bring people down. And so what God does is said, if you do that, I will push you even lower.
Well, so I think hitting on the contrast is really important, because think of what we do if we describe a human as an animal. If you describe, not in the sports sense, like a football player being an animal, like
well, we call people
vicious. But if you describe somebody as the one I think that really hits at is if you describe someone as a pig, which men get described as, it's normally you're describing a man who is purely hedonistic and self-motivated. Yeah. It's somebody who is, I want something for my own satisfaction and I'm going to go get it by whatever means necessary. Right. That's how we would describe the animal.
Well,
and that's but
like, not crafty.
No. So that's what I mean. Yeah. Animal. That's how we describe them, as animal. That's how we would describe a pig.
Yes.
If you describe someone as like that, you would describe them as being, that's the person you're trying to encapsulate, as somebody who's just purely concerned with their, typically it's materialistic desires, sex or food or something like that. And that feels like, that encapsulates, and that in our mind then encapsulate what primary motivations for animals are.
Right.
This motivation it doesn't fall in that
it's
class.
Something worse.
It falls in that worst class of not, I just want this because I want this for me to enjoy it, which isn't a great motivator, but it's not as bad as I want to bring things down. I want you to suffer.
Right. So as an example, consider people like Jeffrey Epstein, right? Or Charles Manson, right? People who they played on temptations for people, for sure, and made it easy for people to indulge their sinful desires. That's what they did. They orchestrated these things. I mean, they took part themselves to some extent, but more so than that, they like orchestrated ways for other people to enact these things. They brought people down to these levels. And I don't think anyone has a problem well, I mean, some people, I guess, who are as bad as they are, but most of us don't have a problem with seeing people like Epstein and Manson as lower than the animals, right? If you told me that you could save the life of one of them or any random animal on the face of the earth, I think I take the animal every time. Right? It's like, which one are you going to save, right? You know, this wombat or Epstein? Let's save the wombat. You know, I'm all for it. You know, I think we can see this curse played out when we look at individuals like that and how they are viewed within society. I think we really do see them as lower than that. And that's why those are kind of people that we would refer to as snakes, because we are saying they're the lowest, right? They're all the way down there. That is, you know, that's the next part of the curse, right? The serpent being so low that it crawls on its belly, or actually people say chest may even be a better translation, which I think is important because the chest houses the heart, right? Which is where desire is thought to come from in ancient cosmology. That's, or ancient understanding, that is where desire is thought to come from. The mind is actually housed in the intestines. We'll get to that in the future. But the heart contains desire and passions, and that is, you crawl on those. That is all the way down to the ground. You know, your desires, your passions, your heart, your chest is all the way down onto the ground. That's what I think the curse of going on its belly, or chest being maybe the better translation, reemphasizes just how low that those who wish to bring people down, that's how low those people are.
Yeah, we talked about this last week, or last episode. We talked about the Joker from The Dark Knight, and that's this scene where the Joker burns all the money, and the criminals are sitting there going, why would you, what? Like, they hate, they would have no idea why he would do such a thing. And it's that's why it's a good image of what evil is, because those criminals are criminals. They're understandable. It's like, okay, I get it. I get why you just want things. You're an animal.
Right.
You just want to have certain things, and you're going to do it by whatever means necessary. You're not a human.
Yeah.
But you're not below animals. You're understandable. You're an animal. And there's this wanting to bring everything down, to crumble. And that's what the Joker represents. He's like, I can get all the money, and I'm just going to burn it all anyways, because I want it all to fall apart.
Right. Yeah.
That's and that's what's encapsulated here by this serpent. Yeah.
He's more of the snake. So the basic lesson is if you seek to bring others down, you will be pushed even lower than them. Like it is a task doomed to failure. If you try to bring people down, you only bring yourself down. You won't ever bring them down to your level, right? That being the goal. You are doomed to never be able to do that. You will always end up lower than they are. Okay, so then we get to the next part here with the eating of dust. And this is kind of interesting, right? We've talked a good bit about the idea of man being something that is part dust and part God breathed, right? This being the idea that man is something part earthy and part heavenly, part spiritually, right? Going back to the very beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Well, man is a mix of both of those things, right? So here we're told the serpent will eat dust, and there's a few different reasons this is interesting. It suggests perhaps what it suggests is that serpents may want to consume all of us, but they will only ever be able to take for their own that sort of earthiness of us, right? That they may be able to harm the earthly part of us, but the spiritual part of us, that will be judged by God. That is kept for God. So the serpent may consume the dust, but they won't ever consume more than the dust. The spiritual part is safe in a way, you know, like maybe saved for redemption. Let's put it that way. It's protected for the possibility of redemption by God. It won't be consumed by the serpent. Although the dust part of us maybe, you know. And that, I think, that pairs a little bit with the idea of wanting to bring themselves to the same level as everybody else. This is another way in which they're sort of unable to do that, right? Were they able to consume the God-breathed parts as well? Were they able to feast on that and not just the earthy? Perhaps that would even the scales in a way, right? But that's not available to them, the spiritual parts. This sort of it demonstrates that, it reinforces again the first part, that you can't ever pull people down to your level. If you are trying to pull people down, you're always going to sink lower than them. And of course, this pairs nicely with the idea of dust making for a very unsatisfying meal, right? Eating of dust, it sure doesn't sound pleasant, right? Yeah. And so that also preserves the idea of the lowness of space that the serpent occupies, right? So what we see in this portion of the curse, and we'll look at the next portion next episode, is that while the serpent may have success in a way, right? Because, I mean, the serpent succeeded. The man and woman ate the fruit, right? So you could say that the serpent succeeded here. But ultimately, it must be an unsatisfying success, since it only pushes the serpent lower, not actually brings others down to his level. And because the spiritual part still belonged to God. God called and they came, right? And so the spiritual part, that God-breathed part, still belongs to them. And so the earthiness is all that the serpent can ever hope to acquire. So it's a curse of like perpetual dissatisfaction, right? Playing the role of a serpent will never provide the satisfaction you seek. That's, I think, the lesson we get from this first portion of the curse.
Agreed.
Yeah. All right, then. That's the first part of the curse, and we'll take a look at the second next time with verse 15. So be sure to subscribe, follow along. Send us your disagreements, because I'm sure there are many, especially with the idea of the serpent not being Satan. I'm sure we'll hear for it on that one. So you can email us unschooledtheology@protonmail.com. Leave a comment if whatever platform you're consuming this on allows for that. Like, subscribe, share with friends, even if it's just to share how wrong we are. Have at it, and we'll see you for the next one. Thanks.